Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about something incredibly difficult, but really necessary to understand. The Rwandan Genocide of 1994.
It's one of those moments in history that's just hard to get your head around. In about 100 days, nearly 1 million people were killed.
The speed is just staggering.
It is. And to really grasp how something like that could happen so fast, you can't just look at 1994. You have to go back, way back. The stage was set long before the killing started.
Okay, so let's start there with the history. Before colonial powers arrived, you had the two main groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi. How did they see each other?
Well, their relationship was much more fluid. They spoke the same language, shared a lot of the same culture. The difference was often more about, your job or your wealth. Like a Tutsi was often someone who owned more cattle. It wasn't a fixed racial identity.
So you could potentially move between the groups.
In some ways, yes. But that all changed when the European colonizers, first Germany and then Belgium, showed up. They brought their own really racist 19th century ideas with them.
What kind of ideas?
They looked at the Tutsis, who were often taller and had different features, and just decided they were a superior race. They even claimed they were more European or something. It was complete pseudoscience.
And they built the entire colonial system on top of that idea.
Exactly. They gave the Tutsi minority all the advantages, better education, jobs in the government, positions of power. And then they did something that made this division permanent.
The identity cards.
The identity cards. In the 1930s, they made it law. Every single person had to have a card that said Hutu or Tutsi. And suddenly, what was once a sort of flexible class system was now a rigid, official racial category you could never escape.
I can't even imagine the resentment that would build up among the Hutu majority being locked out of power for decades like that.
It was immense. And it all boiled over when Rwanda started moving toward independence in the late 50s and early 60s. There was a violent uprising, a Hutu-led revolution, and the whole power structure was flipped on its head.
So the Hutu took power.
They did. And this led to waves of massacres against the Tutsis. Tens of thousands were killed, and many, many more fled the country, becoming refugees in places like Uganda. And those refugees, especially their children, formed rebel groups. The most famous was the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front.
And their goal was to return home.
To return home by force if necessary.
Yeah.
So you have this deep-seated conflict ready to explode for decades.
So let's jump forward to the early 1990s. The situation is incredibly tense. What turns that tension into the fuel for genocide?
A few things. First, you have the rise of a movement called Hutu power.
Yeah.
These were extremists who were terrified of losing control. They used the media to push this message that the Tutsi were not real Rwandans, that they were invaders coming to take everything back.
And they mixed that ethnic hatred with real-world problems,
Yeah,
right?
that was the key. Rwanda is a very small country with a lot of people. Land is everything.
Yeah.
So the extremists told the Hutu population, the Tutsis are coming back to take your land, to enslave you. It turned an ethnic issue into an economic existential threat.
It sounds like they were cornered.
They were made to feel that way. At the same time, there was actually a major push for peace. The Arusha Accords.
Right, the peace deal signed in 1993, what was that supposed to do?
It was supposed to create a power-sharing government. It would bring the Tutsi-led RPF rebels into the government and the army alongside the Hutu. It was a diplomatic solution.
But the extremists hated it.
They despised it. For them, sharing power was the same as losing power, so they did everything they could to undermine the peace process.
And where was the international community in all of this? There were UN peacekeepers on the ground.
There were, yes. But their mandate, their orders, was incredibly weak. They were there to observe the peace deal, not to enforce it. They were explicitly forbidden from using force to stop violence.
So they were just watching it all fall apart.
Essentially, yes. The world, especially the U.S., was still reeling from a disastrous intervention in Somalia. Nobody had the political will to get tangled up in another complex African conflict. The peacekeepers' hands were tied.
An incredibly fragile situation. It just needed a spark.
And that spark came on the evening of April 6, 1994. The plane carrying Rwanda's President Habyarimana was shot down over the capital, Kigali.
We still don't know for sure who did it.
No, it's still disputed, but it didn't matter. The Hutu extremists immediately blamed the RPF rebels, and they used that crash as the excuse to launch a plan they already had in place.
This wasn't a spontaneous reaction then.
Not at all. This was planned. Within hours, hours of the crash, roadblocks were set up all over Kigali. The Presidential Guard began hunting down and killing any moderate Hutu politicians who supported the peace accords. Then they started on the Tutsis.
And this is where the Interahamwe come in. They weren't soldiers.
No, and that's what made it so terrifyingly effective. The Interahamwe was a civilian militia, the youth wing of the extremist party. They had been secretly trained and armed for months.
Armed with what?
Machetes, clubs, simple farm tools, cheap, easy to get, and brutal. And because they were local, they knew everything. They knew which of their neighbors were Tutsi. They knew where they might try to hide.
So they were working with the army.
Hand in glove. The army would secure an area, and then the Interahamwe would go door to door. And for many of these young men, there was an incentive. They were promised the land and property of the people they killed. It turned genocide into a job.
That's horrifying. How did they coordinate all of this so quickly across the whole country?
One word: radio. In a largely rural country with low literacy, radio was the most powerful tool imaginable. It reached everyone, everywhere.
And one station in particular, RTLM.
RTLM, Radio Télévision Libre des Mille Collines. It was a machine for pumping out hate 24/7. They called Tutsis cockroaches that needed to be exterminated. They had popular DJs who made killing sound like a patriotic duty, like going to work.
And it wasn't just propaganda. They gave specific instructions.
Yes, this is the chilling part. They would literally read names and addresses over the air. The cockroaches are hiding at this church, or so-and-so is hiding at this address. They guided the killers in real time.
Which made places that people thought were safe, like churches or schools, into traps?
The deadliest traps of all. Thousands would flee to a church, thinking they'd be protected there. Instead, the killers would just surround the building and slaughter everyone inside. It was systematic. No one was spared. Women, children, babies.
And for 100 days, the world mostly just watched.
It's one of the greatest moral failures of our time. The UN commander on the ground was sending desperate warnings, saying a genocide was being prepared. He begged for a stronger mandate to intervene.
But the UN Security Council did nothing.
They hesitated. They debated whether to even use the word genocide because that would legally obligate them to act. Instead of sending more troops, Belgium actually pulled its soldiers out after 10 of them were killed. The message to the killers was clear. No one is coming to stop you.
So who did stop it?
In the end, it was the RPF, the Tutsi-led rebel army. They launched a massive military offensive from Uganda and fought their way across the country. In July 1994, they captured Kigali, and the genocidal government collapsed and fled.
Ending the genocide, but creating a whole new crisis.
A massive one. As the RPF advanced, millions of Hutus, including many of the killers, but also many innocent civilians terrified of revenge, fled into neighboring Zaire, which is now the DRC. It created a refugee crisis that has destabilized that entire region to this day.
So the RPF takes over a country that's just completely destroyed. How do you even begin to find justice when hundreds of thousands of your citizens are killers?
You can't. Not with a normal court system. The entire infrastructure was gone. So they turned to a traditional Rwandan system called Gakaka.
What does that mean, Gakaka?
It literally means justice on the grass. They were community courts, held outdoors in villages. The whole community would gather. Survivors would confront the accused.
So it wasn't just about punishment.
No, the primary goal was truth. The hope was that if people confessed and told the whole truth about what happened, the community could begin to heal. The sentences were often things like community service, especially for those who confessed. It was controversial, but there was really no other way to process that many cases.
And what about today? How does the country move forward from that?
The government's main policy has been forced unity. They completely removed ethnic labels from ID cards. It's now illegal to talk about Hutu or Tutsi in a way that promotes division. The message is, you are all just Rwandan.
Has it worked?
It's complex. On the surface, Rwanda's recovery has been incredible. It's one of the safest, most stable, and fastest developing countries in Africa. Kigali is a beautiful, modern city. They have the highest percentage of women in parliament in the entire world.
That is remarkable.
It is. But the memory of the genocide is everywhere. It shapes everything about their politics and society. The government prioritizes stability and unity above all else.
It's a story of just the absolute worst of humanity, but also incredible resilience.
It really is. It shows how dangerous division and hate can be, but it also shows the strength it takes to rebuild a nation, quite literally from the ashes, based on an idea of unity.
We hope this gives you a clearer understanding of this incredibly important moment in history.
Good luck with your studies.